We want to go to Washington, D.C., where Alexis, we're joining Anthony Swift, policy analyst for the Natural Resources Defense Council, specializing in energy issues. Can you talk about what's happening here and also this new pipeline that President Obama is on track to approve, though that is not a done deal, that would go from the tar sands in Alberta to the Gulf of Mexico, passing through the area of Montana we're talking about today?
Yes, I can. I should probably point out that the Exxon spill was on a pipeline that carried 40,000 barrels a day. The pipeline you just mentioned, Keystone XL, would carry 830,000 barrels of oil a day, a type of oil that's very corrosive and has some new risks that conventional oil does not. Now, this pipeline would go over Yellowstone, the Missouri River, through the Ogallala Aquifer, and cross nearly 2,000 rivers and reservoirs across the United States. And one thing that this Exxon spill on the Yellowstone shows is that our pipeline regulations are not really up to the task of ensuring that these pipelines operate in all conditions. And it's clear that we need to ensure that our pipeline safety regs or regulations are ready before we consider building a massive pipeline across the Yellowstone River. I mean, to give you a point of reference, had this spill happened on Keystone XL, nearly 1 million gallons of toxic tar sands would have likely spilled out of Keystone XL because of its higher capacity.
And what is the reason that ExxonMobil needs to build such a long pipeline from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico? Are they expecting to refine the oil down in that area or ship it overseas or what?
Well, I should probably say Keystone XL is actually being built by a company called TransCanada, and they actually have built their first oil pipeline in the United States was started in 2010, a pipeline called Keystone 1. That pipeline has had 12 spills already and is actually the youngest pipeline in the United States to be considered by regulators a imminent threat to safety, life, and the environment. So, this is a pipeline company that has already had significant problems with its first pipeline in the U.S. The reason they want to build Keystone XL is they want to move crude to Gulf Coast refiners. It's true. But I should probably point out that right now there are twice as many pipelines coming from Canada as Canada has crude to fill them. So there's really no rush to building a large pipeline through our water supply before we figured out the safety issues.
While residents are contending with the effects of the ExxonMobil oil spill, the Obama administration is considering whether to approve the construction of this Keystone XL project that we're talking about right now. But I wanted to go back to the governor of Montana to hear what he had to say. Speaking to PBS, Montana Governor Brian Schweitzer explains why the Keystone XL pipeline will be safer.
Actually, in my conversations with TransCanada, the companies that proposed the Keystone XL, they've assured me that, A, they use this boring technique so that none of these pipelines will be laid into these river beds. And secondly, instead of having humans involved in the shutoff devices, you see, this device that was placed along the Yellowstone River was actually controlled out of Houston, Texas. Yeah, you got it. In Montana, they had controls in Houston, Texas, and after some 7 minutes, they started shutting the pipeline down. It took about 30 minutes. TransCanada has explained to me that across every river and stream in Montana, that they would have automatic shutdown valves and backed up systems by humans, so that this kind of catastrophe would not and could not occur. First, the pipeline is not in the river, and secondly, there are automatic immediate shutdown systems, which ExxonMobil did not have in the Silvertip.
That's Governor Schweitzer of Montana. Alexis Bonogofsky, your response.
The thing about pipelines is it's not if it fails, it's when it fails. And to say that it could not and would not happen is mind-boggling to me. In one area, he says he doesn't trust Exxon here, but then, says he trusts Exxon to move big rigs through western Montana. To me, these corporations are the same. Money is the bottom line for them. And, safety is, they're cutting corners on the Keystone pipeline. They're using pipe that is thinner than they should. And, you know, this will happen over and over and over again until we decide as a country that we're going to move away from dirty energy.
And Anthony Swift, your response to the Montana governor's statement?
Well, I would say three things. One is TransCanada's emergency response system, rather than operating out of Houston, will be operating out of Calgary, hundreds of miles away from Montana, and thousands of miles away from other states and rivers in the United States. I would also say that Keystone 1 has shown that that claim is somewhat suspect, because, you know, the biggest spill on Keystone 1, a 21,000-gallon spill in North Dakota, was reported by a landowner who saw a geyser of oil rising 60 feet above the cottonwood trees. And it wasn't until 50 minutes after that spill had happened that TransCanada was able to shut it down. So it seems odd that they're claiming that they'll have a much faster response time in theory than they've shown in practice. And finally, I would say that, you know, the Exxon pipeline was built under the river as well. I mean, we don't know what happened, but Exxon estimated that it had been at one point as far as 12 feet below the river. TransCanada also plans to build a pipeline below the river, a little deeper, but still we have not clearly determined all the safety issues posed by this corrosive crude, and we've found many pieces of information that would suggest this crude would be far more damaging if and when spilled.
Finally, I wanted to ask Anthony, Bill McKibben, Naomi Wolf, Naomi Klein, and others have announced a plan to launch a civil disobedience campaign against the Keystone XL. But can you talk about other oil spills in the tar sands pipeline, what we should know about, for example, in Michigan?
Well, yes. In Kalamazoo, there was a very large tar sands pipeline spill in Michigan. About 1 million gallons of tar sands was spilled in, I believe it was in July of 2010. They're still cleaning up that river. Essentially, much of the oil was much heavier than the water, so it didn't float above the water, couldn't be contained. We won't know what the long-term damages of that will be until years from now, likely. And, you know, we've seen in Canada information that suggests their pipelines have had leaks due to internal corrosion much more often than ours have. This pipeline, I mean, tar sands, the type of stuff that they're moving is different from anything we've seen in our pipelines until recently. And it is basically a combination of tar and volatile natural gas liquids. These things increase the risk of explosion, of toxic vapors when a spill happens. I mean, there are just a lot of issues that our emergency responders need to be aware of, and a study that needs to be done to determine how an impact of such a spill could be contained and dealt with before we, you know, decide to embark on this new piece of infrastructure blindly.
Well, I want to thank you, Anthony Swift, Natural Resources Defense Counsel, joining us from D.C., and Alexis Bonogofsky, family farmer, joining us from, well, just outside of Billings, Montana. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Back.